Hi, my name is Ann Goldstein, and I'm scientific editor at Neuron. We're here at the 79th Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory Symposium on Quantitative Biology, and this year's topic is cognition. Today I'm joined by Dr. Michael Shadlen, who's professor of neuroscience at Columbia and HHMI investigator. Dr. Shadlen is one of the pioneers studying higher cognitive function, and his work has laid the foundation for understanding for the basis of decision-making in the brain. It's a great opportunity to have a chance to chat with you, Dr. Shadlen.
Likewise.
I'd like to start by asking you, what led you to approach asking the question about how decisions are made and decoded in the brain?
Okay, that's a great question. So I had been doing my postdoctoral training with Bill Newsom, who was really the main pioneer in this field, and we had worked out with our colleagues the degree to which you could relate the perceptual limits of a monkey, in this case, and humans for that matter, with by understanding signal-to-noise relationships in the visual cortex with what you could call noise relationships in behavior, that is, errors and accuracy. And when we did this, we did a lot of computational modeling to reconcile the neural recordings to the behavior, and we realized that probably we had, by doing that modeling, kind of hypotheses about what downstream structures in the brain would be doing to actually render a choice from the data. And that's a decision. You have information, you deliberate about it, reach a decision. And then I have this background in neurology, and I'm very frustrated by what I would regard as a lack of even rationale to the logical approach, let's say, or rationale to patients with disorders of higher brain function, autism, schizophrenia, you name it. I think decision-making kind of gives us a window on sort of the very basic building blocks, the rudiments of what became cognition in full-blown, like what we're doing now, having a conversation. And so, and you think about it, because decisions involve some kind of contingency, using information at a flexible time scale. These are sort of all the basic elements of thought in general. Mm-hmm. So the study of decision-making, you might say, in normal brains is the study of what makes a normal person not confused. So that's sort of the nuts and bolts of what led us down the path to structures in the brain that might be making decisions about something simple like visual stimuli, which came from Bill Newsom, and but seeing it in a sort of a broader context of what it is that constitutes a thought, or coming to a belief.
And so, how do you do that? Like, how do you actually study decision making in a setting where you have a human or a subject? How do you actually build a task to test decision making?
Well, in a way, every psychologist that's ever done a perceptual experiment has a decision component, because in the end, the subject, human, monkey, rat, whatever, is going to look at something and decide what it is that he or she has seen, and push a button or make an eye movement, whatever. And so then the insight, I think, in some ways, for me anyway, comes from philosophy as to what to do about that, which is to basically jettison, or at least hold with some skepticism, the basic idea that what we know is what we represent in the brain, and instead think backwards, that what we know about the world is the kinds of is the information as it bears on hypotheses we have about the world. And what that really means is, if I'm going to answer with a button box, I've got to figure out what it is in the brain that made me move my thumb to push a button, and say, wait a second, that had to ultimately get informed by the information in the world, and now I've defined a decision process now backwards from the behavior, and that turned out to be the key. So it allows so then at the neural level, going inside and opening up this black box and saying what's happening in the brain, instead of starting with more and more elaborate representations of the world, representations of vision, and putting labels on it, like that's right word. Mm-hmm. Instead we say, well, no, I'm going to ultimately answer with a word, an eye movement, a push of a button. So what led my body to sort out that I was going to push this button or that button, move this eye, say the word right, say the word left, and so forth. And in doing that, that was, I think, that insight, which is really an insight from philosophy, led us to put our electrodes in a part of the brain that you wouldn't have thought of doing otherwise. So we work backwards from, in our case, the oculomotor system, because that was the way monkeys reported their answers about decisions. And luckily for us, it led to an exposure of not just I'm pushing right, I'm saying right, but the deliberation process, all the steps that led to that decision. So there it is.
One of the things I've noticed is that recently there's going to be new studies that are using microstimulation in humans, and certainly that's been happening a lot in mice with some new tools. And I was just wondering, how do you feel that will help us understand complex cognitive things such as decision? I mean, is that a very strong tool, and how can we use it?
Well, I think it's extremely strong. Most of what we do in systems neuroscience, my area, is correlative. I'm a big defender of correlation. I mean, I think that if you find neural signals and you relate them quantitatively, not just, I saw an increase in this and by a t-test it was higher under condition A than condition B, but rather a few extra spikes per second from this neuron meant a few more probability points of being correct, or a few milliseconds shaved off the reaction time, or something like that. So those kind of quantitative connections are valuable. But in the end, if you're studying these neurons, you'd kind of like to say, well, is this circuit involved, or can I manipulate it in some way? And there's a lot of dangers to that. I mean, there's no guarantee that the neurons that you're activating have a direct access to behavior. But causal manipulations are really important, and we're seeing all these new techniques for causal experiments, be they DREADS or optogenetics and so forth, and so I think we're in early days. But the trick that's worked for us for the longest amount of time, really again begun by Bill Newsom, was this electrical microstimulation in the visual cortex initially, and then it's been used all over.
And so I noticed from your abstract that you're going to be speaking about the neuromechanisms of confidence. Do you mind sharing with us what do you mean by confidence, and what is the neuromechanism of confidence?
So when we make a decision, you could say there's the choice part, which we could kind of grade as accurate, correct or incorrect. There's the how long it takes you to make it, so now we're talking about speed versus accuracy. And then there's this third component, which is more elusive, which is confidence. You can think of confidence as I'm about to render a decision based on the information as I've processed it, the evidence, you might say. Is it going to be correct or not? It's sort of an internal prediction about whether the thing we've just committed to is correct or not. Okay, and so how do you get that? Where does it come from, and how do you measure it? So a guy in my lab, Rizbe Kiani, who's now assistant professor at NYU, he figured out a way to do this by stealing a trick from the cognitive psychologists, where you get monkeys to bet. So you say, okay, look, you've made your decision, but you could opt out of this and get a small reward, okay? Or you can stick with it and go left or right, say, and get a big reward if you're right and nothing if you're wrong. And that turns out to be a way to measure confidence. And we can go through a lot of details, but it's not important. So that's what confidence is. In the end, is the brain kind of having some internal implicit knowledge of the probability that the decision about to be rendered is correct. Okay, and then it turns out that the same theories that explain how signal-to-noise of information in the world, or the visual system in our case, leads to being correct or incorrect, leads to being faster or slower, explains the trade-off between those two. That same set of mechanisms also explains how you could predict from your own choice whether you're likely to be correct or not. And so, and the abstract you're referring to, the most recent experiment, as unpublished, is that when we stimulate the brain and cause changes in choice, which was the original experiment that Bill Newsom did 20-something years ago, we show that we have quantitatively commensurate changes in the degree of confidence. And that's, for us, it's a bit of a shocker, because if you stimulate the brain artificially, these causal manipulations, we have no idea what it really does to a brain. And so, give an animal an opportunity to say, wait a second, that was wacky, never experienced anything like that before. And they don't tell us that. They say, that was like vision. So.
And so in closing, so what are you most excited about in this area of what's the next level for understanding decision and how it actually relates to other higher cognitive processes?
Yeah, well, I think what I'd like to say is that what we're doing is exposing what I hope will be principles of cognitive neuroscience. In our case, I've just alluded to several of them: integration of evidence, having some reason to stop and therefore trade off speed versus accuracy, doing computations in the language of probability theory. We can talk about belief that I'm going to be correct or not. And I think that all of those kinds of elements come to play when we're having a dialogue using language and logic and so forth. And so what I'd like to think is that as we got bigger brains and sort of more of the association cortex that supports these simple kinds of decisions, those same operations, and some to be discovered, of course, are going to come to play. I actually believe that those are also going to be failure modes we will learn one day those are failure modes in diseases that affect higher brain function, spanning schizophrenia, autism, you name it, okay, confusion states in general. And my dream is that we'll be treating diseased brains one day by restoring these kinds of function, integration of evidence, setting bounds to terminate decisions, and so on and so forth. And so that's a 20-year kind of horizon, but it definitely charts out lots and lots to do. We're nowhere near it, but I think you can almost see the path there.
Well, thanks so much for coming today. I really enjoyed speaking with you, and I hope everyone enjoyed watching as well. Great.